thank you so much for being here today. This is another episode of the XR Magazine podcast, and I am Diana Olenik, your host for today. So today we're gonna be speaking with someone unbelievable. His name is Thomas Van Bouwel, and he's a Belgian Brazilian VR developer with a background in architecture and engineering. He first made the switch to VR in 2016 when he started working as a product engineer for a startup called Resolve. In 2020, Thomas launched his first commercial game called Cubism, which quickly got high reviews and became widely popular in the store. I'm super excited because this is one of the cases where we see an indie developer to have this type of success, and he is gonna explain today how he did it and how you can do it too. Let's jump into it. Thank you so much for being here today. As I mentioned, we are speaking with Thomas Van Bouwel. And Thomas, we are super excited. We'd like to know about you. Please let us know, how did you get started in this amazing journey, particularly maybe if you want to tell us from the time that you were in high school or perhaps university, and then how you transitioned to where you are right now.
Of course. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me on. So I got started in VR back in 2016, but before that, I was actually an architect. So I studied engineering and architecture, and I worked as an architect for about 3.5 years. But I was always fascinated with technology and how it could be used in design, and particularly how it could be used to make design more approachable to users. So, you know, I always liked video games, and even during architecture school, I would sort of take my 3D models of my apartment designs, my building designs, and put them in video game engines to be able to walk through them. So I always thought this was very fascinating. And then when the new wave of VR came around with the DK1 and the DK2, I sort of jumped on that wave because I was so interested in what that technology could do to the design process. So first it was just a hobby, and I just started to learn Unity sort of in my spare time. And, you know, I bought like a DK2 and sort of got started doing like small walkthroughs of buildings and things like this. But then in 2016, I actually quit my job as an architect and really wanted to learn like VR development proper. So I basically quit my job and did every game jam and every hackathon that I could as sort of a means to teach myself and to make small projects to put certain ideas out of like how VR could be used in architecture and the design process. And so there was a few months where I was just sort of teaching myself and working with other people through these like game jams and hackathons. But through those little projects, there was sort of one project that helped me get a job in the XR industry. That was sort of my first tech job and my first VR job. And it was for a startup called Resolve. They were a startup based in Brooklyn in the US. And they were making software for architects, basically sort of a collaborative review software so that the architects and engineers can sort of jump into their models and find issues before the building is built. So to me, it was this sort of perfect marriage of my two interests, architecture and VR. But sort of all throughout this, I was still doing game jams and sort of making games as a hobby. Like at first, it was a very utilitarian thing, like making games, because learning the skills of making VR games is the same skill set that you sort of apply to make applications in VR for architects and engineers. But I found that the game development community, the indie game development community, is such a great community. Like there's so many interesting and cool people in there, and you get to learn so much from working with people in there. So it's just fun to make games and keep doing that as a hobby. So I kept doing that throughout my work at Resolve. And there was this one little hobby project that I started called Cubism, which was this like simple puzzle game, very small in scope. It was specifically small in scope, so I could do it as like a hobby project in the weekends. And I first started this in 2017, and I sort of kept working on it until it sort of spiraled out of control into a full game, until I was able to release it in 2020 on the Quest and on Steam. And then that game sort of started doing a bit better than I expected, and I went full time from my previous job onto like game development to be able to build for Cubism. And so I've been doing that for like a year and a half now, sort of building updates for Cubism, and also recently starting to work on a new project. So that's that's sort of the whole career in a nutshell.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Thank you so much for making such a great summary. We have now more like context and background of how this amazing journey has been. I am fascinated because now is where I want to go a little bit back in time
Mm.
and try to understand how an architect, and engineering, you were in that field. How did you actually start with Unity and coding? Like, did you code the app by
Mhm.
yourself? How did you start? This can be a very relatable question for anybody who is just starting out. So please let us know, how was that more in detail?
Of course. No, it can be very intimidating if you're just starting out, right? Because you think like, gosh, there's so many new things that you need to learn to build things. But the fact is that like a lot of the tools have become really, really accessible, right? Around the time when I started was also around the time that Unity first became free, like fully free. So, you could get Unity for free. You can get like Blender for free. There was like a free version of SketchUp and other like 3D modeling software. A lot of these tools were just there. So getting started was sort of more a question of finding the right first small steps to take and like small projects to take with the tools that were there, right? And for me, like coming from architecture, making something that was usable or interesting enough was not too difficult actually, because if you want to make a VR walkthrough of an architectural model, it's not too hard if you have Unity, right? You basically take Unity, you drop in your 3D model, and you put in like a character controller and you just build this for VR, and you can sort of already walk through a building. Like it might not run at a very good frame rate if you drag and drop your actual architectural model, but still like taking those small steps were those steps were small enough that you could get to like a functional program or like walkthrough quick enough that I felt encouraged enough to sort of learn more and more and more. So yeah, just a combination of the tools being very accessible and being able to sort of scope out very small projects and then sort of expanding those projects more and more as I was learning, that really helped, I think.
Yeah, that's great. So did you code before? Like, did you have a background with
Mhm.
coding to jump into C sharp, or how was that for you?
A tiny bit. So we only got a little bit of sort of coding lessons like Java and things like this in university. But I actually coded a website and did some coding and processing for my master's thesis, like my final project. So I learned a little bit with this. And then yeah, learning C sharp and sort of coding for Unity, there was just a lot of tutorials, like really good tutorials available from Unity itself to get started. So having some of that coding background sort of helps lay a groundwork for learning C sharp, right? Like once you learn to code in one language, there's some like logic and patterns that usually transfers to like learning a different language, right? So it wasn't completely like learning coding from scratch when I started with Unity, but luckily there were also just a lot of good tutorials to get started and learn
Yeah.
sort of more complex coding. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And how did you undertake the design workflow? You know that
Mm.
typically in creating apps, there is like normal workflows, etc. I wonder if from your perspective, you build the app on the way, or you actually implemented certain things that maybe you knew before, or how was, in
Mhm.
real life, how was that experience for you with Cubism?
Oh, for sure. So a really important part for me for designing anything is to try and playtest as much as possible. I think whenever you design something or implement some interaction or some user interface or something, you assume you have to make assumptions on how people will navigate through this, or how people will use an interaction, or how people will perceive or experience your app, right? And I know that I will always make like incorrect assumptions, right? So I think putting your app, whatever you're designing or your game, in front of people and sort of observing people as they try to figure it out is a really, really important part of designing anything in VR, of designing anything like point blank, right? Um, So that's something I do always try to do, to just as soon as possible playtest if possible. But even if you don't have something that you can build and playtest, like just sharing it, I think is also helpful. Just for my games and for Cubism, for example, like the very first prototype I made over a weekend, right? It was just like a day and a half. And it was already like a playable prototype with just the base mechanics of like putting blocks into a shape. And it was enough for me to test it with some colleagues and friends to see if it was like a sticky concept or not. And I remember testing it with one of my former bosses, and he was in the headset for about an hour, and he wouldn't take it off. Like he was this immersed because he wanted to like solve the puzzle that was in front of him. So that helped to like evaluate. Okay, this is probably an interesting like app to develop. But similarly, I also took a few videos of this very first prototype and then posted it to Twitter and Reddit, to sort of see like, is there a reaction to this? Like, are people interested in something like this? And it wasn't necessarily like it went super viral or anything, but there was enough of a reaction that at least I could sort of engage that there would be a niche audience, or like there would be people that would be interested in something like a puzzle game like this. So I think both from a functionality standpoint, doing playtesting is important, and then also from sort of a market testing standpoint, I think it's important to share online and see what a reaction or how communicatable a concept is as well. So
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I think that the practical approach is even for someone who is starting out, who is trying to create the first prototype, and every single thing that we try to learn can get as complicated as, right, unlimited, because there can be more guidelines and guidelines and guidelines. And sometimes that very thing that is supposed to help you to create something better, it might also defer the actual process of seeing an initial output or feedback that is necessary from the final user. So this is your example is so great. Like you did it just naturally. Let's bring this prototype, just the bare bones, and put it in the hands of people to see what is their reaction, what do they think, and how do they interact. And that is actually like the basics of design, without even complicating it more. And speaking about simplicity, one thing that I really love about your app, I have to say that I'm super exciting, is the minimalist style. I love that style. Like,
thank you.
I took a short program in interior design many years ago. And for me, from all the styles that exist, minimalism is the one that talks more to me. When I saw your app, I fell in love. I said, I hope one day I could speak with Thomas. And look how
thank you so much.
I participated in a VR in the school, game jam. And with the group, we were trying to, actually, I proposed the idea of creating a tangram, because, tangram is interesting. I like the Japanese culture, as you can see, and minimalism, Zen, and all of this. I love that. So I was deeply inspired by you. And I have to say, sorry. But so then I want to speak a little bit about the art, like why that style, which really ended up being the absolutely best, because that simplicity turned out to be super effective for people to use easier and for you to launch it faster. Could you expand a little bit more about
Of course.
That? Thank you.
Well, actually, so yes, it is also just an aesthetic that I enjoy, right? Like maybe that's part of like the architecture background, but I like simple lines, and I like like clear geometries and things like this. But it was also definitely a practical consideration, considering that wanted to have a game that was feasible as a one-man project. It was feasible as sort of a hobby project to do on the weekends. So the minimalism helped. But it was also actually kind of the starting point and the reason I started making Cubism. I was really fascinated with minimal design in mobile games. There's great games like Mini Metro or Trees, or like the Lara Croft Go series, or Line Lights, for example. There are all these mobile games that are super simple in their presentation, but really work well with the mechanics and the affordances of the phone. And are also just like scoped well for like small teams. And it was sort of, this was back in 2017 when I made the first prototype. And I was sort of surprised that sort of there's a lot of complexity you can put into a VR game in a VR prototype because you're super immersed. I was surprised there weren't that many minimal games in VR. And sort of the starting point of thinking about the concept of cubism was what could a minimal game in VR look like? And sort of where it makes use of the best affordances of VR and sort of where it could only work in VR, but where you sort of strip away all the fat and all the extra things. And so this sort of idea of the block puzzle, which, you know, it's a type of puzzle that exists for many, many years, right? But it felt like it would be a good fit because you sort of need the dexterity of your 6 degree of freedom hand controllers. And you can really use the fact that you can, you know, inspect the puzzle from every angle and stuff. So it felt like it was a game mechanic that really fit VR well, but where you could also just strip away all the context and just have you in the puzzle as this sort of a, you know, minimal setup. And so, yeah, that was sort of the main idea. And then also with this first prototype I made over weekends, all these sort of core concepts of like the minimal design were already there. Like it was really just a gray environment with the puzzle there, and just these like little triangles as hands, and you were solving a puzzle, and that was it. So from the get-go, the idea was to make a minimal game and figure out what a minimal design could look like. But there's also like a part of the consideration of making a game that's easy to pick up and play. Like that's usually also a nice thing about these mobile games, right? Is that it's really easy to get into, and then you can see it's sort of, it makes it much more accessible for a broader audience that maybe typically wouldn't play games. And that's definitely something I wanted to have for Cubism as well, like to have a game that could really be picked up and played by anyone, even if they haven't played games before or if they aren't that familiar with VR. And so this was something I didn't have in the first prototype, where you know, the first prototype maybe was using all the buttons on the controllers, but that was sort of a lot of the process of the work that I was doing in the years developing it, was sort of simplifying the control scheme and making it easy to learn and to really just be able to put the headset on someone and, you know, get them to solve a puzzle within the first 15 seconds, to make the game accessible and easy to use, so it could sort of reach a wider audience. So that's also a big part of the idea behind the minimal interactions and aesthetic.
Yeah, that's so exciting to know how you, right? How did you come up with that? And especially, I put a lot of attention, which I found as an interesting detail, the way that you develop your UIs, right? Like it's different. It's not the expected flat. It's
Right.
a cube, and it goes so well because it's cubism.
Right.
I'm like, wow, this is so good. Okay, that without mentioning the music. So I wonder if you could explain a little bit of how you came up with all of that is like so fluid and so beautiful.
Oh, thank you. So I guess to explain a bit, the way that the music works in Cubism is that basically there's a sequence of 60 puzzles that you solve, and that's broken up into 10 stages. And then every puzzle has a number of pieces. And so in the game, every piece is related to a piano notes. And so when you solve a puzzle, you hear a chord. And then when you solve a sequence of puzzles, it's a sequence of chords. And so the whole sequence of puzzles basically forms a song together. So as you sort of progress and continue to solve puzzles, you can play this little play button that will play the song of the game, let's say, up until the point that you solve the puzzles. There's this sort of extra incentive to sort of solve everything, but to also sort of tie everything together. And yeah, so the idea is, and so also when you're solving the puzzle, and if it's taking a long time to find the solution, it's like classical piano music comes in. And it's like a lot of Robert Schumann and some other composers, basically to sort of calm you down if it's getting a little bit stressful, like solving the puzzles. But yeah, like the very first trailer I made for the game was set to a Sati song. So which was sort of, I had to have a trailer at one point, like within 2 weeks, for this festival where a trailer would be shown. So I needed a song, and so you know, using this sort of public domain classical music seemed like a good approach. And so that's sort of how I came to classical music and classical piano, but it felt like a really good fit for this sort of game as well. And so from that point on, I sort of kept the classical piano team, and that's how the piano design of the puzzles also sort of got involved into the game. And this idea of like for a long time, the idea was actually to have the game be silent, and the only sound is like when you solve the puzzle and you hear this piano chord or like the song of the puzzles. And so that was also just that also came from the idea of like, okay, let's keep this like minimal and manageable as like a one-man team. Which is, I thought, okay, I can get away with maybe this like simple sound design and maybe that can be it. But very close to release, like a few months before the actual release on Quest and Steam, I just realized the game was too silent. So then I contracted a friend of mine, Salia Wong, who's a pianist, to then record some of these other piano pieces. And that's so that this classical music that plays in the background, it really was just an addition of the last 3 to 4 months before release. But I do think like it really helped set the mood for the game. But yeah, that's how it all got implemented.
Yeah, that's such a great idea. What type of tools actually you use to create the overall app? That would be interesting to know. What's the
sure. Yeah. So the game is built in Unity, and using various SDKs for the different platforms. So currently it's using the Oculus utilities to build for Quest, and it recently switched to OpenXR for Steam. And yeah, there's also an SDK for Pico, the Pico Neo. There's not too many like external tools and like assets that are used in the game. There's one asset called Audio Helm, which is basically like a synthesizer or like a set of tools for audio in Unity, which have been really useful to sort of have this piano play dynamically in the game. But other than that, a lot of the tools are just sort of custom built for the game. So
did you build, for example, the UIs? Did you build them inside Unity, or how did you build like the everything?
Yeah. So this is
Pro
all
builder
built in
or
Unity.
like normal?
Oh no, it's just well, so a lot of the geometry is just like default cubes from Unity, or at least started from this. So some of the geometry is like made in Blender or SketchUp and then processed through Blender. But a lot of it is just like default geometry from Unity, actually, or sort of composited from a lot of this sort of default geometry, right? Like all the puzzle pieces are just a bunch of cubes sort of spawned together. All the lines of the puzzles are also just like stretched out cubes and things like this. So there's a lot of like very simple basic geometry that sort of composes the look of the game. And for the UI, like these buttons, so the UI, to explain, is you have these 2D buttons, and when you hover over them, they sort of expand into 3D, into sort of boxes. And this is also just a lot of base geometry, right? So for all the edges of these boxes are also just stretched out cubes. So it's all very basic if you break it down into the components.
Wow, but it's a very beautiful game. I encourage anybody to try it,
Thank you.
To delve into it with the intention of this relaxation and enjoyment, because I believe that is also the idea of the game, like the person can relax through the experience. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's the idea was to have something that's fun and challenging and accessible for a lot of people. But then it turned out after it launched that a lot of people found it very, very relaxing. And there's actually been this study around like the game and how VR can be used for relaxation. It's a study that hasn't been like, the results haven't been publicized yet, but they have used like Cubism as a case for this. Because a lot of people do seem to like jump in to sort of wind down. And that's definitely like great to hear from my point of view. Like I did hope that it would be something like a Sudoku or something, where or like a crossword puzzle or something, where at the end of a long day somebody can sort of pull up Cubism and do 1 or 2 puzzles and relax.
Wow, that's amazing. And what is your current endeavor, or what are you have in the future for Cubism, or what is about you that you're working on right now that is exciting, that we should always take a look and enjoy from your creations?
Thank you. As I did with the start of Cubism, I try to be pretty public on like the things that I'm working on, and the things that might be coming next, which is like good and bad because like that way I can get early feedback, but also maybe I'm working on something that won't release. So whatever I post online, you should take with a grain of salt. But yeah, I'm working on some new updates for Cubism. There's some small updates. That are sort of built around the Scene API that recently launched and became available for Quest, which is this sort of tool set that Meta is sort of developing, where you can map out your room and map out different furniture in your room. And so for Cubism, the idea is that you could sort of, instead of having a puzzle floating in there, have the puzzle sit on your tabletop. And you can sort of press on the table to interact with the buttons and things like this. So that's still in development. And there's also a puzzle editor, actually, that I've been working on, where people can make their own puzzles. And that will be a bigger update for later this year. I'm still sort of finalizing the actual scope of it. For now, it's just a local editor, so you can design puzzles. And then, in the same way that you would sideload a mod onto a different game, like Beat Saber or something, you could sort of offload and sideload puzzles into Cubism. But yeah, I'm seeing if I can maybe expand this a little bit before release or not. But so there will be some form of a level editor for Cubism, so people can make their own puzzles. But yeah, the thing that I'm really fascinated by now is, the nice thing about Quest is that it's hardware that's sort of evolving a lot through software, right? Like it was first a really good VR headset, but then they came out with hand tracking, and then they came out with pass-through, which sort of lets you use the camera footage and basically use the Quest as an AR headset. And then now they're coming out with these scene tools where you can sort of map out your room and sort of actually use your entire room as sort of a play area. And I think this is really, really fascinating. And I think it sort of unlocks a lot of different types of new types of games and experiences. So I really wanted to build something specifically for that. And so my next project that I've been working on has been something along those lines. And I've been posting about it pretty publicly on Twitter. What I'm building is this sort of a kind of like a Mission Impossible game where basically you put two buttons on each end of your room, and then you get these lasers that spawn across your room, and then you have to sort of dodge your way through it like a spy. And so it's your actual room, and you use your actual body, and so it's really about like making the most of an AR game that lets you explore the entire space. And it's still very early stages. There's still some like fundamental design decisions and questions that I need to sort of figure out for the gameplay. But it's from the playtests that I've done, it's been pretty fun to watch people play, and people seem to enjoy it. And especially people seem to enjoy watching other people play, because people get very immersed and sort of drop to the floor to crawl under the lasers and things like this. So so it's been fun to work in. And it's definitely a 180-degree turn from Cubism, right? Like Cubism is this seated, accessible, relaxing game, and this laser game is a lot more intense and a lot more about like movement and stuff. But
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow,
but
that
it's very early
sounds
days.
exciting. Thank you so much for sharing that. Wow, yeah, we're gonna be following everything that you're doing, because we are very excited and to support you. You're doing an amazing work. Thank you so much. Thomas, it has been a great conversation. I think that we've learned a lot about your approach, how your design is, and how you develop your own, creations, tools, etc. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I wonder, is there anything that you wish I had asked you today?
God, no, you've been very, very kind with your questions. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to talk about my experience and my projects. And yeah, I'm very grateful that you had me on. So if anybody wants to follow the work that I'm doing, you can follow me on Twitter at Thomas Van Bouwel. And that's where I usually post sort of the latest work that I'm doing. So yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much. I am inviting to everybody to download the app Cubism and to follow Thomas. We are really celebrating Thomas. He has been doing a lot of work, and all in order to demonstrate his capabilities, his art, and bring in a product that is very helpful for anybody and that is easy to use. It's so beautiful to experience. Thank you so much, Thomas. It has been a pleasure. We really wish to know more about you. So please tag us, Diana Olenik, whenever you are launching something or giving any updates so we can follow up on your stuff. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much and see you in the next episode. Bye for now.